The spring of 1945 did not arrive in Berlin with the blooming of flowers or the song of birds. It arrived with the rhythmic, earth-shaking thunder of Soviet artillery, a sound the locals called Stalin's organs. For 12 years, the Third Reich had projected an image of monolithic strength, a 1,000-year empire built on the foundations of steel, discipline, and an supposedly unbreakable will. But behind the propaganda films of Leni Riefenstahl and the grand architectural visions of Albert Speer, a much darker reality was taking hold. The Reich was not just losing the war on the battlefield, it was rotting from the inside out, consumed by a terminal case of paranoia and a secret intelligence failure that had effectively blinded the German high command. To understand the collapse, one must look past the burning tanks and the shattered cities. We must look into the bunker, a claustrophobic labyrinth of reinforced concrete deep beneath the Chancellery Gardens. Here, the air was stale, smelling of sweat, disinfectant, and the heavy perfume of the flowers Hitler's staff kept in a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of normalcy. The man at the center of this empire, Adolf Hitler, was no longer the charismatic orator of the 1930s. He was a shadow, his hands trembling from what many now believe was Parkinson's disease. His mind clouded by a cocktail of experimental drugs administered by his personal physician, Theodor Moll. But the true secret of the collapse wasn't just the health of the Führer. It was the total disintegration of the German chain of command. By early 1945, the German military machine, the once feared Wehrmacht, was operating in a vacuum of information. The Allies had achieved something more devastating than any single bomb. They had achieved total information supremacy. Every major decision made in the Berlin bunker, every troop movement ordered toward the Oder River, and every desperate plan for a Wunderwaffe or miracle weapon was being read by Allied intelligence officers before the German generals even received their orders. The ultra-secret, which we now know was the key to the entire conflict, had turned the German high command into a group of tragic actors performing a play where the audience already knew the ending. The atmosphere in Berlin was a strange mixture of Wagnerian tragedy and bureaucratic madness. While the Red Army was literally miles away, German officials were still meticulously filing paperwork, issuing promotion decrees, and debating the nuances of racial purity. It was a collective delusion that reached from the highest offices of the SS to the lowest clerk. But beneath the surface, the rats were already preparing to leave the sinking ship. Men like Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Göring, once the loyal lieutenants of the Nazi cult, were beginning to send secret emissaries to the Allies, hoping to trade the lives of millions for their own survival. This was the true secret of the collapse. The Third Reich didn't just fall to an external enemy. It was cannibalized by its own creators. By the winter of 1944 and the early weeks of the German High Command OKW was effectively a body whose nervous system had been severed. The secret that truly toppled the Reich wasn't just a single spy or a hidden document, but the total, systemic compromise of their radio communications, while the German generals sat in their bunkers, moving wooden blocks across maps of East Prussia and the Ardennes. They were unaware that every turn of the Enigma's rotors was being echoed thousands of miles away in the English countryside. The Allies didn't just know where the German armies were. They knew what the German generals were thinking, often before the orders reached the front lines. This created a surreal atmosphere of calculated failure. In the final months, Hitler's paranoia intensified. He began to suspect everyone: his adjutants, his field marshals, even his own shadow. He was right to be paranoid, but he was looking for the wrong ghost. He searched for a traitor in his inner circle, ordering executions and purges, while the real traitor was the very machine he trusted to keep his secrets. The Enigma, which had been the pride of German engineering, had become a window through which the Allies watched the Reich's slow-motion suicide. In the corridors of the Zosen bunker complex, the tension was palpable. Officers whispered in the dark, wondering why their carefully planned counterattacks were being met by perfectly positioned Allied walls of fire. It was as if the enemy could read their minds, and in a way, they could. The secret of the collapse was that the Germans had lost the ability to surprise the world. When they launched the Ardennes offensive in December 1944, they relied on radio silence to achieve initial success. But as soon as the tanks began to roll and the radio traffic resumed, The Allies used the ultra-secret to pinpoint the exact moment the German fuel supplies would run dry. The collapse was not just a result of running out of bullets, it was a result of running out of secrets. In Berlin, the civilian population was living in a state of Third Reich, the twilight of the gods. The propaganda machine, led by Joseph Goebbels, continued to scream about final victory and miracle weapons Wunderwaffen, but the reality was written in the ruble. The secret collapse was also a logistical one, because the Allies had broken the codes governing the German railway system to Reichsbahn. They knew exactly where every trainload of coal, steel, and ammunition was headed. They didn't have to bomb every track. They only bombed the tracks that mattered. This surgical precision, made possible by intercepted secrets, turned the German economy into a shattered clock, its gears grinding against each other until they simply snapped. As the Soviet ring tightened around the capital in April 1945, the betrayal reached the highest levels of the Nazi hierarchy. Heinrich Himmler, the man who had overseen the most horrific aspects of the regime, was secretly attempting to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies through Swedish intermediaries. He believed he could use the remnants of the SS as a police force for a new, post-Hitler Germany. He didn't realize that the Allies were reading his secret cables. They knew he was a dead man walking. The Reich was no longer a government. It was a collection of warlords, each trying to trade a different piece of the burning empire for their own skin. This internal disintegration, hidden from the German public, was the final blow that ensured the surrender would not be a negotiation, but a total annihilation. The final act of the Third Reich played out in a space no larger than a modest apartment, buried 50 feet beneath the scorched earth of the Reichs. In April 1945, the Vorbunker became the epicenter of a dying empire. The air here was a stagnant soup of diesel fumes from the emergency generators, the acrid smell of burning documents, and the pungent aroma of expensive brandy consumed by officers who knew they would never see another summer. Outside, the Battle of Berlin was turning the city into a lunar landscape, but inside, the secret collapse was accelerating. Hitler was now issuing orders to armies that no longer existed. The ghost divisions of General Wenck and Steiner that lived only on his outdated maps. The true secret that toppled the Reich in these final hours was the complete breakdown of the Nazi chain of command. It wasn't just that they were losing, it was that they had stopped being a cohesive government. In the upper levels of the bunker, secretaries were frantically feeding a decade of secrets into heavy-duty paper shredders, or dousing them in gasoline in the garden above. They were trying to erase the paper trail of the Holocaust, the blueprints for the V2 rockets, and the lists of foreign collaborators. This war of the archives was a desperate race against time. While the Soviet soldiers were fighting room to room in the streets above, Allied T-Force intelligence units were racing through the chaos, following secret leads to capture German scientists and their data before the fire Zor the Russians could claim them. Inside the map room, the scene was one of madness. Hitler, his face a mask of pale fury, moved from fits of screaming rage to periods of catatonic silence. He felt the sting of betrayal from every side. He had just learned through a BBC broadcast and ultimate irony of intelligence that his loyal Heinrich Himmler had attempted to surrender. The internal collapse was now absolute. The man who had demanded total loyalty was being abandoned by the very monsters he had created. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was the psychological disintegration of a cult. The secret of the collapse was that the Nazi ideology had no plan for failure. It only had a plan for victory or destruction. And since victory was gone, destruction was the only order left to give. On April 30th, 1945, the ultimate secret was sealed with a single gunshot. Hitler's suicide was the final admission that the illusion of the Third Reich had shattered. But even as his body was being burned in the garden, the battle for the Reich's secrets was reaching its climax. In a secret operation known as Paperclip, Allied agents were already identifying the brilliant, if morally bankrupt, minds behind the German war machine. The secret toppled the Reich, but its fragments were already being gathered to build the foundations of the Cold War. The collapse of Berlin was the end of one nightmare, but the beginning of a new era where German secrets from rocket science to nerve gas would become the most valuable currency on Earth. As the Soviet flag was raised over the ruins of the Reichstag, the world saw a city in rubble, but the real story of the collapse remained hidden in the captured files, the interrogated generals, and the decrypted cables. The Third Reich had been a house of cards held together by the myth of invincibility. Once the Allies broke their codes and exposed their internal fractures, the cards didn't just fall, they turned to ash. The collapse was the inevitable result of a regime that valued loyalty over truth and secrets over reality. In the end, the very shadows the Nazis used to hide their crimes were the same shadows that allowed the Allies to dismantle them from within. With the smoke still rising from the ruins of the Chancellery Garden, the Third Reich entered a surreal, final state of existence. Following the secret codicil and Hitler's will, power did not pass to the flamboyant Gring or the treacherous Himmler, but to Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz in the small, northern port city of, near the Danish border. Abisarigos government established itself in a naval school. For 23 days in May 1945, this Flensburg government attempted to act as if a German state still existed, while the world around them had already been carved into occupation zones. This was the final, pathetic stage of the collapse. A group of officers and bureaucrats in crisp uniforms, holding meetings and issuing decrees, while their empire consisted of little more than a few square miles of docks and barracks. The secret objective of the Dönitz government was not victory, but delay. They were desperately trying to keep the war going against the Soviets for just a few more days, hoping to allow as many German soldiers and refugees as possible to flee west and surrender to the Americans and British. This was the great secret of the final week. A frantic, one-sided race to choose who would capture you. In the Baltic Sea, German destroyers and merchant ships were packed with thousands of people, dodging Soviet submarines in a final, bloody exodus. In Flensburg, the atmosphere was one of quiet desperation and intense intelligence activity. British agents were already moving among the German staff, identifying who among the high command held the keys to the Reich's remaining secrets. While the legitimate government sat in Flensburg, a much darker movement was taking place in the shadows. This was the birth of the Ratlins, the secret escape routes used by SS officials and war criminals to disappear into South America or the Middle East. The collapse of the Reich was so chaotic that it provided the perfect cover for mass murderers to shed their black uniforms, burn their identity papers, and assume the personas of simple refugees. The secret toppled the Reich, but the lack of a coordinated Allied intelligence effort in those first weeks allowed some of the most horrific figures of the regime to slip through the fingers of justice. Men like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele began their long journeys into the shadows, a secret shame that would haunt the world for decades. Simultaneously, the Allies were conducting Operation Lusty, an operation also as clandestine missions to strip the Reich of its scientific soul. The secret to the Nazi collapse was also the secret to the future of the Cold War. In hidden salt mines and mountain bunkers, Allied teams found things that defied belief. The prototypes for the Hotu Chunin stealth wing, the blueprints for infrared night vision scopes, and the terrifying research into Taban and sarin nerve gases. The Reich had collapsed physically, but its technological ghost was being partitioned. The Americans took the rocket scientists. The Soviets took the heavy industry and the nuclear research facilities in the East. And the British focused on the naval and aeronautical breakthroughs. The Flensburg government was finally dissolved on May 23, 1945, when British troops simply walked into the naval school and arrested the entire cabinet. There was no grand battle, no heroic final stand. The Grand Admiral and his ministers were led away, their briefcases filled with useless documents. The secret was out. The Reich was not a thousand-year institution, but a fragile, hollow shell that had been held together by a cult of personality. When the personality died, the shell shattered. The collapse was total political, moral, and physical. What remained was a broken nation and a mountain of files that would take the world half a century to fully understand. By the autumn of 1945, the physical collapse of the Third Reich was complete, but the moral collapse was only just beginning to be measured. The city of Nuremberg, once the site of the grandest Nazi rallies, was chosen for the International Military Tribunal. It was a symbolic choice. The laws that had stripped Jews of their citizenship were not the very grounds upon which the architects of the regime would be tried. As the 21 high-ranking Nazis sat in the dockmen like Herming Gring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop, the world prepared for a secret to be revealed that was so vast and so horrific, it would change the human psyche forever. The greatest secret of the Third Reich was not a military weapon or a diplomatic betrayal. It was the Sang der Judenfrage, the final solution to the Jewish question. While the Allies had received fragmentary reports throughout the war, the full industrial scale of the Holocaust was a secret the Nazis had tried to burn along with their victims. But as the Allied prosecutors began to present their evidence, they didn't rely on mere testimony. They used the Germans' own meticulous record-keeping against them. Thousands of tons of documents captured in the final weeks of the collapse provided a paper trail that led directly from the desks in Berlin to the gas chambers of Auschwitz and The courtroom in Nuremberg became a theater of the macabre. For the first time, cinematic footage of the liberated camps was shown to the world and to the defendants. The secret was out. A modern, civilized state had used the tools of the industrial age to manufacture death on a scale never before imagined. This was the ultimate revelation of the Nazi collapse. The Reich hadn't just lost a war. It had forfeited its right to exist in the community of nations. The defendants reacted in various ways, some with feigned ignorance, others with cold, unrepentant arrogance. But the secret files, the ledgers of gold teeth, and the hair of the murdered spoke with a voice that could not be silenced. The trials also revealed the secret internal mechanics of how a nation is turned into a killing machine. It wasn't just the work of madmen in the bunker. It was the collaboration of the entire German infrastructure. The engineers who designed the crematoria, the bureaucrats who scheduled the trains, and the companies that manufactured the Zyklon B gas were all part of the Banalität des Bösen, the banality of evil. The collapse of the Reich exposed this vast network of complicity, showing that the secret to their power was the normalization of the unthinkable. This was the final, terrifying lesson of the Third Reich, that, under the right conditions of propaganda and fear, an entire society could lose its moral compass in less than a decade. As the hangman's noose claimed the leaders of the Reich in October 19, the secret history of the collapse was finally codified into international law. The Nuremberg Principles were born from the ashes of the Reich, establishing that following orders was no defense against crimes against humanity. The Third Reich had fallen, and its secrets had been laid bare, but the scars it left on the world remained deep and raw. The collapse was not merely the end of a regime. It was a permanent warning to future generations about the darkness that can flourish when secrets are used to shield the conscience, and when power is allowed to operate in the shadows of an absolute unchecked will. The guns had fallen silent across Europe, but a new, invisible war was already erupting from the ruins. The secret of the Third Reich's collapse was that its intelligence apparatus didn't simply vanish. It was dismantled and reassembled by the victors. In the summer of 1945, as the dust settled over Berlin, a man named Reinhard Gehlen, the former head of the Wehrmacht's military intelligence on the Eastern Front, made a calculated gamble. He knew that while the Reich was dead, his archives thousands of files on Soviet military strength, industrial capacity, and internal politics were more valuable than gold to the Americans. Gehlen had spent the final weeks of the war carefully microfilming his records and burying them in the Bavarian Alps. This was the Gehlen Organization, the most controversial secret of the post-war era. The United States, desperate to understand the rising Soviet threat, made a deal with the devil. They took Gehlen and his network of former Abwehr and SS officers and installed them in a secure compound in Pula. These men, who only months before had been the primary enemies of democracy, were now the primary source of intelligence for the newly formed CIA. The secret collapse of the Reich provided the DNA for the modern Western intelligence system. The methods of the Gestapo and the Abwehr were studied, refined, and sometimes directly implemented in the fight against communism. In the East, the Soviet Union was conducting its own ruthless harvest. While the Americans focused on the brains of the intelligence world, the Soviets focused on the hands of the industrial and scientific world. Thousands of German engineers and technicians were forcibly relocated to the Soviet interior in Operation Osovyakim. This was the secret engine of the Soviet rocket and jet programs. The collapse of the Reich had effectively started a massive technology transfer. where the secrets of the V-2 rocket and the Me-62 jet fighter became the blueprint for the Cold War's arms race. The Third Reich had fallen, but its technical and strategic ghost was now haunting both sides of the Iron Curtain. This period also saw the birth of the deep state myths, because so many former Nazi officials had been absorbed into the governing structures of both West Germany and the Soviet-occupied East. A culture of secrecy and suspicion took root. People began to wonder, had the Reich truly collapsed, or had it simply gone underground? This question was fueled by the stay-behind network's secret cells of anti-communist Ahens, many with former Nazi ties, that the Allies established across Europe in case of a Soviet invasion. These networks, such as Operation Gladio, remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the 20th century. A direct legacy of the desperate pragmatism that followed the fall of Berlin. The secret toppling of the Reich led to a world where truth was more elusive than ever. For decades, the archives of Bletchley Park, the files of the Gehlen organization, and the details of Operation Paperclip remained classified. The public was told a story of a clean victory, a triumph of good over evil. But the reality was a messy, moral gray zone where the secrets of a genocidal regime were used to build the foundations of modern security. The collapse of the Third Reich was not just a military event. It was a massive, silent auction of human knowledge and depravity, where the highest bidders won the right to shape the future using the remnants of a nightmare. As we look back from the distance of more than 80 years, the collapse of the Third Reich reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of power. A regime built on the suppression of truth will eventually be destroyed by the truth it tried to hide. The secret that toppled the Reich was not just a single code or a specific betrayal, but the cumulative weight of 1,000 lies that finally crushed the foundations of the German state. By May 1945, the Nazi Empire had become a hall of mirrors where no one from the Führer in his bunker to the soldier in the foxhole knew the reality of their situation. They were victims of their own propaganda, blinded by their own arrogance, and ultimately outmaneuvered by an enemy that had turned their own technology against them. The final irony of the collapse is that the very obsession with secrecy that the Nazis used to protect their vision was what ensured its rapid disintegration. Because they operated in a culture of fear, information did not flow. It was hoarded. Generals lied to Hitler to avoid his wrath. Subordinates lied to generals to protect their positions. In the end, the Reich was a machine where the gears were no longer touching. When the Allies broke the enigma and captured the archives, they didn't just find military plans. They found the blueprint of a collective madness. They found a state that had spent more energy hiding its crimes than winning its battles. The legacy of this collapse still shapes our world today. Every time we discuss the ethics of mass surveillance, the power of cryptography, or the responsibility of leaders to tell the truth, we are hearing the echoes of the fall of Berlin was the ultimate proof that military might, no matter how advanced, cannot sustain an empire if its moral and informational core is hollow. The secrets that were captured in the ruins, the technical breakthroughs, and the intelligence networks went on to fuel the Cold War. But the most important secret was the one that couldn't be filed away in a cabinet. The secret of how easily a civilized nation can descend into barbarism when it stops questioning its leaders. In the final seconds of our journey through the ruins of the Reich, we are left with a haunting image, not of the grand parades or the Iron Crosses, but of the millions of documents blowing like autumn leaves through the scorched streets of Berlin. Those papers contained the names of the dead, the designs for weapons of mass destruction, and the orders for a final stand that never came. They represent the debris of an absolute will that met an absolute end. The Third Reich didn't just lose a war, it evaporated when the light of reality finally reached the dark corners where it lived. The secret is out. The Reich is gone, but the lesson remains, carved into the scarred stones of Europe, and written in the classified files that still remind us. An empire built on secrets is an empire destined to fall. As the shadows of the past continue to lengthen, we must remember that the greatest weapon against any tyranny is not a bomb or a bullet, but the courage to see the world as it truly is, and the strength to ensure that such a darkness never finds a place to hide again.